And we're live. Good morning, Fabrice. How are
Good
you?
morning, Nick.
You had a good morning?
I had a good morning. I mean, it's starting with you, so it's great.
It's always good to start with a compliment. I like to start these conversations with some personal questions so that the audience gets to know you a little bit from a different perspective. I got about seven cards here in my hand. Each card has a personal question. So you
Hmm.
just say a number from one to seven, and I'll pick the card and read the question.
I will pick three.
One, two, three. What is a memory you keep holding on to and why?
Oh, wow, that's a deep question. Uh,
You can
it,
take your time.
it could be
No
any
stress.
memory.
Yeah. What is a memory you keep holding on to and why?
The thing, okay, the phrasing of the question, which is like keeping, um, keep holding on to, like something you will never forget.
Something you haven't forgotten yet and why?
Mm. I don't- I mean, I could answer in so many ways. Um, One of the spontaneous answers, one of my oldest memories ever,
Mm-hmm.
which is extremely old and will probably never disappear, is I must be full and the neighbor closes its the car and the car starts like burning. A fire comes out of the engine.
Oh, wow.
And 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 I don't know, it was like quite spectacular. You're 4 year old and you're looking at I don't know, I was playing in the street and just closing the car quite strongly like makes it start fire. So why am I holding on to that? I guess it was like probably one of the most spectacular thing I saw when I was 4.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But it's also I think I'm trying to put too much meaning probably in that memory, but there's also this idea that the technology was not as reliable as I believed, right? I think
Yeah, maybe that's where your mission in tech started.
like this.
That's an exciting memory to hold on to. I mean, I think I would have remembered that as well. I got a similar one. Well, not as spectacular, but I remember swimming in a swimming pool and diving, and then at one point not finding the surface anymore. So having
Oh
this
wow.
near drowning experience.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, and
How old
I
were you?
think I think I was about 6, 7,
Oh wow.
and I think the reason I keep holding on to it is there's still a fear today if I dive of I always remember I need to make sure that I know where the surface is.
That's
Yeah, yeah. Memories is a strange thing because do you remember the actual event or do you remember the last time you remembered it? Do you know that theory about memories? So
I
the,
don't
the
know that
theory
theory,
is
but
that you actually don't really remember the event, but you remember the last time you remembered it.
hmm. I mean, what is so I wouldn't be able to answer which of which, but what is clear is that yeah, I mean, I remember that one because it probably struck me a lot, and then it has come back often. Like it's a
Hmm.
really interesting one.
Okay. So we already learned that your mission to make tech better started at 4 years old. Maybe forward about 30 years later, you're one of the co-founders of Teodo. What is Teodo and what do we need to know about Teodo?
So Theodo, we're a tech consultancy, so we build digital products for a wide range of companies. Really, like we work with startups, we work with successful scale ups, And we work with a lot of large organizations um, in almost every industry, financial services, aerospace, pharma, health, etc. Um, and so we're about 700 people now, spread. So most of the team is in Paris, but we also have two offices, one in London, one in Casablanca, and we've been doing this for about 15 years now already, building tech products ever since. And I guess, I mean, the reason I'm here is because we had a few epiphanies in our journey, and one was really discovery of agile, and then the next one was the discovery of lean thinking.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, what is one product that you guys built? By the way, 700 people, that's like big. That's impressive. What is one product that you've built or helped build with Teodo in the past 15 years that you're really proud of?
Ah, um, I mean, we've built so many products, and I'm actually, fortunately, very proud of most of them. Um, One, I could give you a lot of examples, but I think there's two types of pride. One is when you're very happy about the impact of what you've done or how ingenious the product was. And I know we've done some stuff in the energy space, um, which I find fascinating. So we've used machine learning to help avoid accidents when you're drilling for oil. Um,
Wow.
we've used sensors and digital connectivity to reduce the consumption of oil tankers, with like quite significant impact, probably because not enough people had tried to optimize it before. And then the other types of products that are a source of pride are often also like the public ones. Because, for example, if I like two recent products we've been working on, one is the new streaming platform of TF1. So that's very widely used. It's been a huge success for them, and so it's easy to point at it. If you're in France, of course, the TV channel, and so you've heard about that
Yeah,
product.
even I, not being a Frenchman, I know TF1. Yeah.
I've got one even better for you. So we've been working with a large organization that runs most of the ski stations in France. So
Mhm.
rebuilding the mobile app of a lot of ski stations. So uh,
Wow.
so
Yeah.
if you
So
are one
I'll be
of
using that every next year probably.
exactly if you're one of these people that go to France to ski, then you might be using our apps.
Okay. Well, that also gives a little bit of context why we're here. This book
Hmm.
that you've recently released, the Lean Tech Manifesto. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank
Learn
you.
the secrets of tech leaders to grasp the full benefits of agile at scale. Cool. So I'm guessing we're going to dive into some words that are widely used, but also often misused. So I'd like to start with some very simple definitions. When you talk about agile, what do you mean?
Mm. Um, it's a very good question, and it's not that easy to answer. And I guess, I mean, I'm gonna try a decently long answer. Um, so one thing, what the good thing about agile is at least there's a kind of definition, because the word agile really becomes popular in 2001 when a few pioneers in software engineering who were frustrated by the way large organizations and consultancies were building software, started thinking about alternative ways of building software. So, so that's really first important element of context is this, the current way of building software was what was called waterfall or V-cycle. So something that was very, very processed, very bureaucratic, and that was leading not only to disenfranchised teams on the ground, but also like spectacular failures. So that was kind of the state of the art. There's one project I'm talking about in the book, which is about late 90s, like where late 90s, early 2000s, where the UK tried to build the UK Benefits Agency tried to build a card to pay um, people who needed like social benefits,
Mhm.
and they basically wasted £100 million on a project that actually never really came out. So
Wow.
that was kind of the state of the art. And against that state of the art, different people from different kind of backgrounds came to thought about different ways of working and came together in February 2001 in a resort in Utah and tried to find the common principles that they shared. And they found four principles, and they called these four principles together the Agile Manifesto, actually the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. And so when we talk about agile, it really starts here. It starts when um, when like about 12-ish people, a dozen people came together and identified four principles that were really at the heart of working in a better way. So more in a better way. So that's the start of agile. And that really then spread. And of course, today, agile has become so popular that people put a lot of meaning behind it. But I think when you listen to how what people understand when they use the word agile, they really understand two things. There's this humanist vision of empowered teams that are more autonomous to create value. And then there's a more, let's say, business vision of innovating very fast to outcompete the market.
Mhm.
But when people use the word agile, they usually mean either one of the two or a combination of the two.
So maybe for the listeners and um, to be 100% complete. So the four principles that you're talking about are customer collaboration over contract negotiation, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, and responding to change over following a plan. Probably because in the projects like the one you mentioned from the UK benefits, they've spent so much time and money on contract negotiations, on processes and tools, on writing comprehensive documentation and following a rigid plan that it cost 100 million pounds, but they didn't get to a working software.
Mm. This example, by the way, I mean, I use it in the book because it's been audited by the UK government, so you can actually have a lot of information about what happened, and the reality is always more complex on the ground, and they actually did a lot of things in the good direction, um, but the complexity of the project was such that the few things they didn't do kind of like led to the collapse
Okay.
of the
So
whole
that's
project.
agile. Four principles. You have your humanistic side and getting faster to the market side. On the other hand, you talk a lot about lean thinking.
Mm.
W- what is lean thinking?
So lean thinking is a word that really appeared in the 90s. And it's been coined, uh, invented by a few management scientists, we could call them, working at MIT, and who were working on this research project of understanding why some factories, some manufacturing plants, but they were looking at car manufacturing. So why some car factories were so much more productive and efficient than others. And they researched that for, I think, 5 years and identified that the Japanese car factories, but actually really one company, Toyota, was completely outperforming the others. And it was doing so because it was really engaging the collective intelligence of the workers in the factories much better than any other competitor. And so this really sparked a movement in manufacturing where, of course, all the competitors said we want the same thing. Why are we spending 10 times the manpower to build the same car? And um, and because one of the symptoms of this much smarter factory, in a way, one of the symptoms of Toyota having such smarter factories was that they had less people working in the factory and they had less inventory. So one of the ideas when they were trying to find a name to explain that, they came up with the word lean because the factory was much leaner, like much, less waste.
That's where the
Um,
name comes from.
that's where the name comes from. Interestingly enough, I heard the backstory. So one of the competitors was fragile. Well, I'm glad it lost because one of the ideas they wanted to also express was that it was a very difficult system to sustain. So it was like constant effort to stay lean. So in a way, it was also fragile. And interestingly enough, they didn't think about the word agile at the time. Could have
Hmm.
been probably another option. And then, so that's where the word comes from. And so, in a way, you could define lean thinking as the study of the ways of working that are so different at Toyota and how to adapt them to other industries and other companies. And so that could be a definition of lean.
Okay.
Lean
Is
has
it?
become
Go
so
ahead.
this was in the 90s, so it's been around for now 35 years. And so of course one of the consequences is it's been used and abused. And um, and of course with such a word and with such a promise, less less waste, um, it was used by a lot of consultancies to to do cost cutting in companies. So it has in certain contexts where it's been used to do some harmful things to companies, it has a bad reputation. But we I mean we love lean thinking because if you go back to actually the roots, um, it does reduce waste, but in a way that is actually, again, I think very much in line with my what I was saying about agile, with this humanist vision of developing people and engaging their intelligence, um, to then get the business vision of going faster and uh, and with less waste.
Mhm. Okay. So we've covered the definition of agile, we've covered the definition of lean thinking. Your book starts from the situation where you had this agile revelation when you were growing Teodo, and you mentioned that you went all in on agile. What does that mean when a company goes all in on agile?
Hmm. Um, for us, it was very practical because so we were doing software engineering. So for us, agile methodologies such as Scrum or extreme programming were very well adapted to our business. Um, and going all in means that when you look at these methodologies, you see a lot of good ideas and you start, doing a bit of pick and choose. And going all in is actually deciding to, okay, I will read the book, I will do the training, and I will really understand, I will make the effort of understanding the whole system and then applying it completely and not just parts of it. Um, and that's quite important because actually, the people who design the systems have put a lot of thinking and efforts into designing them, and I'm talking about good systems. And if you only try a part of the system, where you lose the benefit of the whole thing. So for
So,
us, it meant,
as an example, sorry to interrupt, if you take Agile Scrum methodology, that foresees a number of patterns, some meeting patterns to do planning, to do stand-ups, to do retrospectives. It has a number of core roles that the system needs to have. And what you often see in companies is that they say, well, this meeting ritual will skip. We'll focus on this meeting ritual, but we actually don't need that role. We'll replace it by a traditional manager. That's what you mean with not applying the full system as it was designed.
yeah, yeah, and I think, and again, I'm not saying that because that's one of the, it's an argument that can be badly used. You know, you could say, oh, you need to like, follow the system in a completely and potentially in a stupid way. But what I was saying is at the time, with our understanding that was still quite junior of these methodologies, doing really Scrum by the book was a way to get the benefits of the whole thinking that had been put into the system. And then, as we started understanding the why behind some of these rituals and rules, then we were able to do continuous improvement and adapt it probably better to our needs, etc. But the reality was, what was really good for us is when we decided to go all in, we didn't have enough understanding to actually know how to adapt things. So it was better to actually do everything as prescribed, realize it worked, and then realize why it worked, and then start doing a bit of continuous improvement.
Get it. I get it. But then at a certain point, Teodo continues to grow and you hit the limits of Agile. What are the limits of Agile?
Um, so the reality, I mean, there was no limits inside the software engineering team. It was really, it was working so well. It was day and night compared to what we were doing before. The client representing the business need was in the team. It was going fast. There was continuous improvement. So for us, it was what Scrum and extreme programming and DevOps IDs had brought to that software engineering team was amazing. Like really, it was giving us better outcomes, better products, happier clients, and happier teams. So I guess what it really did to us was it gave us the conviction that sometimes when things were difficult, there was a different way of working hidden somewhere that we didn't know about that we could that we could adopt to really improve things. And that's what agile methodologies have done to the software engineering team. However, the limit is not really a limit in the sense that Scrum never promised that it was a framework to run a company. And so at the time, the question was, what is the equivalent framework that would really improve things that we could apply at the company level? What is also the framework that would really change things that we could apply on very big projects where it's not about one team, but really about 3, 4, 5 teams? So these were the questions we were asking ourselves. These were questions that the Agile movement was not answering at the time. Um, and yeah, that's basically the limit. It's just at the time it was really clear that agile methodologies were designed for one small software team, and that if you looked at the whole company or if you looked at a project involving 5 or 10 teams, then you needed to look for a different answer.
Mhm. Is that also related to a phenomenon that you often see happening in organizations that a software team or the IT department goes into this agile adventure and they find that it improves the way they work, but they have a lot of challenges involving their business partners in that agile way of thinking, and that you somehow end up with this half pregnant
Hmm.
state of being, right? With one foot in agile and then one foot in the classical corporate bureaucracy. Is that related to the limits that you've just described?
Yeah, it's a good example, but this is I would put it in the category of multi-team project because when Agile was working incredibly well for us, the business stakeholder was in the team. So what you're describing in larger organizations is that first, you have multiple teams. So the business stakeholder and the tech engineering team are not in the same place. They're not working together full time. And that's one constraint. And then the other constraint is often there's not one business decision maker. There's, a whole organization with multiple stakeholders, with, different constraints, different needs. And so these are really two big constraints that mean that the, agile principle of customer collaboration over contract negotiation uh, doesn't work anymore. And, if you look at extreme
Why?
programming,
Why doesn't it work anymore?
but
Ah,
because if
because the
you
customer is no longer part of the team.
exactly. Extreme programming says, customer collaboration over contract negotiation means the customer is in the team. Scrum says the customer is the product owner.
Mhm.
And so we've done that, and it's amazing. It's incredible. And we, it was also the, still the early days of digital transformation. So we would be able to say to like, the leader of a small business, we would say you are the product owner. And of course, if you have the leader of the small business as the product owner, you get the full benefits of Agile because they know what their business needs. They have a really good understanding of, what they need in terms of digital to catch up with competitors. And all they need is like a team of engineers around them to like, think about the product together. And that's where you get the best of Agile. When you're in large organization and you can't have the CEO in the team for multiple reasons. One, maybe the CEO doesn't even know what the product is about. So the people who actually know what you need, well, there's not one person, but like, five or six. And the size of and the complexity of the organization means it can't really be solved by one team of three engineers, but you need like, 30, 40 engineers. That's when uh, um, yeah, that's when you can't just say, okay, let's collaborate with the customer because you're like, which customer and which team gets to collaborate with the customer, and what about the other teams?
Okay, so the problem is clear. In the book, you present a solution without disclosing all the secrets of the book. What is the essence of the solution that you found through experimentation and experience?
Well, I'll start by this example because I think it's a good one, and then probably like explain how we generalize it. But on that typical example, which is how do I get this magic of having the customer in the team at very large scale? And I mean, first, there's no perfect answer, but when you study lean thinking, you realize that one really important principle, and it's actually defined as the first principle in the book Lean Thinking, is value for the customer. So the idea is instead of saying, okay, we'll rely on customer collaboration to build the right product, you acknowledge that you can't just put the CEO in the team and that's going to work. So you're saying, but what we can do is really clarify the North Star of value for the customer. Make sure that we have this shared understanding of our collective objective, which is creating more value for the customer. Make sure that we understand the challenges that we're facing to create more value for the customer, and then design the organization in a way that and communicate and design the organization in a way that teams on the ground know how they contribute to that value for the customer. And so that's how you get some of the benefits of this agile customer collaboration, but at any size of organization.
Yeah, so practically, that would mean that instead of kicking off a project directly by collaborating with the customer and almost immediately start drawing what the customer thinks he needs, you spend more time in identifying the actual value that you want to create together with a couple of representatives that are representatives of the customer.
Um, One thing I would be mindful of is to not make it a sequential process.
Mhm.
Often one of the benefits of a large organization is that you exist, so you already have products, so you're already providing value for the customer. So there's no need to stop everything and be like, what we need to understand value for the customer.
Mhm.
So
True.
there's also something about lean thinking because it comes from very large organizations where it's very much more dynamic, which is, how do we improve the current state? And typically to be practical, and when we're talking about this, principle of value for the customer, it's about going for the leadership team to go much more on the shop floor. Because often what you realize is, you're taken by all the needs of a large organization, and you spend less and less time on the ground, and you start not really seeing anymore what customers like, what customers don't like. You start also being disconnected from the challenges of the teams on the ground working on the product. And having this discipline of going very often on the shop floor, talking to the people that are really like building the value, helps really improve your understanding of what value for the customer is. So that would really be step one, is to say, if you want to lead with value for the customer, that means that leadership team needs to have a very good understanding of what that value is, which means being much more on the ground where the value is already created. Because I'm reacting to you saying, okay, we should stop and do some upfront
It's a
design,
yeah, a
which is true, but
fantastic. No, I love your correction. Uh,
it's the dynamic situation when you arrive in the organization is that they already have a product and
yeah,
they already know what they're doing, but probably leadership team has a less good understanding than what they believe. They start having misconceptions about the reality that you try to break by bringing the leadership team on the shop floor. So
yeah.
that would be really like one very practical
Yeah,
example of
I love that because then it becomes a dynamic and social learning process when they are on the shop floor and they're just on the job learning from each other rather than going into these half-day brainstorm and workshop sessions and trying to reinvent the wheel. So
exactly. And
thank you for the correction.
I'll give you two amazing examples. I mean, I could give you our examples. So we look at the products we build. We leadership team. Benoit, my co-founder, and I, we go on the ground. We look at the products that we build. We look at the code that is being written. But to give a probably more convincing example, Jeff Bezos really spends 1 week every year. I mean, used to spend 1 week every year. 1 year it would be in customer service, 1 year it would be in fulfillment centers, and really doing the job. And on Monday, I was spending time with Marco Netto, who was like senior vice president of worldwide operations, and he was telling me how he was like stowing products in the fulfillment center, and how he had discovered that the barcode readers usually often had not enough battery. So that's what it means. It's really like doing the job that you know the worker on the ground is doing to understand how some of the ideas that you have about what is happening are actually not perfectly right.
Okay. So that's leading with value for the customer. Then you write in your Lean Tech Manifesto a tech-enabled network of teams over individuals and interactions over processes and tools, which is the agile principle number two, individuals interactions over process and tools. And you say, no, it needs to be a tech-enabled network of teams. What do you mean with
Mm.
that?
And first, I mean, just a small correction. One thing that the book does is reorder the Agile Manifesto.
Okay.
Because one thing you learn when you when you start studying lean thinking, is that it all starts with the customer. And in the Agile Manifesto, the customer is the principle number three. So we did
Okay.
reorder that.
So
Um,
it's first the customer, then the teams in
then the
your,
teams, yeah,
yeah, yeah, makes sense.
it's a very, it's, you know what, it could be a philosophical debate. Lean thinking has chosen their side, which is customer first, and creating values for the customer through the development of people. So it's a very humanistic vision of work. It's a very pro people vision of work, but always at the service of more value for the customer to make sure
Yeah,
that
that's
organization
the
stays
that's
aligned
the
on.
common ideal that the teams need to get out of their comfort zone, which they need to do if they want to develop themselves.
Hmm.
If there's no such ideal that they can strive for, far less people will be triggered and called for action, and so they will not develop themselves. So I
Yeah,
completely
and
and
you know,
fully
what's the
agree.
purpose of an organization? It's it's to it's for the people in the organization to to build something together. Um,
Yeah, an organization is a context in which people with a common goal come together because they cannot manifest that goal and realize that goal by themselves. And that's the, yeah, fully agree. So
so
a
that
tech-enabled network of teams, that triggers me. What do you mean with that?
so that's a so yes. So then looking at the Agile Manifesto and taking out 10, 12 years of experience of practicing lean, growing our company, and being coached by some of the best lean experts in the world, and studying tech giants, such as Amazon or Apple or the Linux organization, very interesting too. We came up with ways to kind of reformulate the principles of the Agile Manifesto, which we thought were scale compatible. And on the individuals and interactions one, which is really the first principle of the Agile Manifesto. And it's really at the core of this humanist vision of Agile, of more autonomous teams. The question was, how do you maintain that kind of autonomy when the organization becomes big and you start having dependencies in all directions, and basically you can't just say it's individual interactions and I don't care about the rest, because and I'll give you the simple mathematical argument is the number of interactions grows to the square of the number of individuals. So if you have well, I'm not sure about my maths, but if you have
Mhm.
three individuals, you basically have three potential interactions. But once you start having hundreds of individuals, you have like millions of potential interactions, well, at least
Mm.
thousands. Um, and one pattern I realized that was very specific to tech, by the way, that you see in the Linux organization, that you see at Amazon, was this ability to redesign the organization to make it more distributed. You see it at Google too. And that was very fascinating. And so we dug into it and we realized that, using the technology, the teams were actually part of a bigger picture, but very autonomous on the ground because their interfaces with the rest of the organization were fully automated. And so this is a bit conceptual. So to make it very concrete, the best example is probably Amazon. So Amazon early 2000s is this huge application, just like any other tech company. It's a lot of code. Everything is dependent of everything else. And so very concretely speaking, when a team needs to change a column in the database, they need to submit the request to the database, administrator team who meet once a month and decide whether the request is valid or not. And if it's valid but not, well explained enough, then they say, okay, come back in another month, improve your request and come back. So very bureaucratic way of trying to coordinate different teams. They have another such system for like transverse projects. So basically you need for your business target as a team, you need to work and, you need to improve things in different places. So you need to convince the other teams to work on your objective. So for that, there's this huge process where you make a request for like, transverse kind of funding. And all these requests come together, and once a quarter, there's this huge meeting where all the directors of Amazon look at all the transverse projects and decide which ones are going to be prioritized and which ones are going to be postponed. And what is incredible for the teams on the ground is they're waiting. So they've been preparing this for almost a quarter. They're waiting for the outcome, and the outcome can often be, sorry, not only does your project not get prioritized, so good luck for your business objective because the project you need for that is not okay. But on top of that, some of the time you have needs to be invested on somebody else's transverse project. And so people really hated it. They had no autonomy. They could not, they had to work on somebody else's objective and they were not allowed to work on their own objective. So, and this typical of a large organization and a large bureaucracy. And because you have to deal with all these dependencies, and it's very, very difficult. The genius of Jeff Bezos at the time is when people were starting to say, oh, we need better communication. He said, you know what? We need less communication. Because, communication is the symptom of all these dependencies, and we need to reduce these dependencies, these interconnections between all the teams. And so the solution was a technological solution, not just, but very much. So they decide to basically re-architecture the whole code into what they call the service-oriented architecture. So basically make it much more modular, assign a team for each module, and then design interfaces that were such high quality between these teams. And so in tech, you call these APIs, for application programming interface. And so make sure that these interfaces are so well designed that when people need to use the interface, they don't need to call you to understand it. So you reduce the dependency. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I need the data of that team. Well, I don't need to call them. I don't need to do a meeting. I don't need to convince a manager. No, I just connect to the API and that's it. And that was really a game changer for Amazon. And that really like unlocked the growth from like, I don't know, 2000 to quite a few more years. And it's incredible because it's also the early inspiration for the cloud. Because you can imagine that some of the teams were like, oh, I still need to send a paper request when I need a new server. Why don't I have an API to request a new server? And they
Hmm.
were like, wow, we're the only ones in the world where you just, get a new server on demand. Maybe that's a product that the rest of the world needs, and that was the start of servers on demand, servers as a service, infrastructure as a service. And that was really the beginning of the cloud in back in 2003, 2005.
Okay. So I think the problem that you sketched at Amazon with all the managers coming together on this quarterly meeting should sound very familiar for many people listening. And then adding on to the root cause or the perceived root cause is the communication is not good enough. We need more communication. So that sounds very familiar. And it's enlightening to hear that then the solution was no, we need less communication. How can we use technology to decrease the interdependencies between the different teams? And so that's what you probably mean with a tech-enabled network of teams. That is that you have all these teams working independent, for the large part, independently on their own objectives, but they are connected to each other in a network through technology like the APIs that you mentioned. Wow. We have two more to go. Um, the Agile Manifesto principle is working software over comprehensive documentation, probably coming from the fact that we spend so much time documenting what we are trying to code. And in the end, we have these great documents, but the software is not working. You mentioned as a principle, write first time and just in time. Please explain.
I mean, all of these principles, are based on multiple books each. I would so it's a huge body of knowledge. On that one, what is very interesting is first, working software was an amazing principles from Agile, and the idea was really, you had these people who are spending so much time preparing to code but never coding. So, but the actual value is created when you write the code. So Agile was saying, let's stop that. Let's deliver quickly. And by the way, when we deliver quickly, we reduce complexity. So we tackle some of the challenges of quality and delivery. Because if you wait 6 months to release a piece of software, then you need to spend a lot of time at the end of these 6 months verifying that it doesn't have bugs. When you release software, every hour, well, if there's a bug, you just revert to the previous hour, and then you have to basically investigate why the additional hour of work introduced a bug. It's quite easy. So that's a really, really good principle. Um, but and and this one scales up to a point, but there's a point at which it doesn't really tell you how to address very large, complex projects. And when it comes to delivering at the very large and complex scale, Toyota is, they're the best in the world. They've inspired manufacturing companies all over the world because they really went much further into what you need to do to produce higher quality and deliver more continuously. And and so this again, multiple books have been written about that, but the principles at Toyota are called Jidoka and just in time. And to avoid using a Japanese word, we translated by right first time. And there's a lot of ideas that are captured by these two principles. But if I had to, just give a few, right first time is really the idea of doing what is now called in software a shift left of quality. So trying to do the quality check as early as possible. So, and then the question becomes, what does early mean? So you look at the way value is produced in your organization, and you look at, where quality of the value is verified, and you try to think, okay, could I do it earlier? You know, um, could I have QA, for example, QA at the end of a process? That's quite
QA
late.
meaning quality.
Yeah, quality assurance teams.
Yeah.
So could maybe like the product owner, if you work, for example, in Scrum, do the quality check. But could you actually like avoid the product owner, but even earlier, like how could the dev team do quality check? And then you come to the earliest part, which is how could the dev actually write code without defects, the right first time. And that pulls a lot of very good practices. Um, some are technical, like unit testing and test-driven development, etc. Some are also more about skills and human capability. So that's one idea. One idea is also that
Isn't the,
comes.
the main shift there in the mindset of the developer as well? Well, I'm far away from the tech space, In
No,
my
it's interesting.
experience, the developers, they develop with the knowledge that the code will be tested afterwards. So it's
Mm.
like they release it quite quickly and they say, well, if there's any bugs, um, someone will pick it up and I will get it back and I will fix it then. And what you're saying is that there should be a change in mindset, that they try to develop code that has no bugs at all.
So that's a yes, exactly. So we're tackling the misconception that having a quality assurance team at the end improves quality.
Yeah.
I was speaking at the UXDX conference in Dublin a few weeks ago. It was very interesting because the shared experience around that in the audience, everybody who went from having a QA team to removing it said the same thing, which is it improves quality. And you
Removing
mentioned
the
one.
QA team.
Yeah, removing the
Removing
QA
it.
team
Yeah.
improves quality. And and you mentioned one of the reasons is because as an organization is a dynamic system. So if you pay someone to check quality, then the other people say, okay, I'm not paid for to check quality. But on the other hand, if you like stop paying for like one person to check quality, but manage the organization, say quality is everyone's responsibility, well, then things move and people start caring about quality much
Hmm.
earlier.
I
Yes, so
wonder if that's the
that's
same thing in factories. Yeah, I'm linking it to a project I'm working on safety culture.
hmm.
You know, both the physical and the mental safety of people in factories. I wonder if the same principle applies to the health and safety teams, because we have created health and safety teams that all the other employees think, well, safety is a little bit less my responsibility because we have a team that makes sure that there's rule in place and yeah, sorry. So I'm
No, but it's a really good point. And by
I'm
the way, in a factory, quality and safety are quite linked.
Mhm.
And so yes, so one of the ideas that is quite popular is about this right first time idea in factories is that in a Toyota factory and now in most factories, you have what is called a hand-on code. So it's a code or a big button that a worker on the ground can push to stop everything at once because there's a safety issue or a quality issue, and the management um, instruction is really clear. When there's a safety or quality issue, we stop everything until we've addressed it. And that creates this mentality of saying, okay, this is everyone's responsibility. And why is it everyone's responsibility? Because if one person has a problem, everybody else has to stop working. So it's a very, very, very strong kind of cultural shift to say, okay, we're not just going to say quality is important. We're going to stop everyone. So we're going to stop the line if there's a quality issue or if there's a safety issue. So yes, that
Okay.
completely changes the way people look at quality and safety.
And just in time? What do you mean with that
So the thing
specifically
is,
in software?
this is where we're really talking about a dynamic system. Because if I say, okay, you stop the line every time there's a quality issue, well, one, and there's no trade-off, then you just stop the line all the time and then nothing happens. Huh? So the very interesting thing is so right first time and just in time are really the two pillars of this Toyota production system. Because the idea is to put some tensions. There's a tension on quality, which is the priority, but there's also a tension on delivery. And really, so just in time is this idea that you're going to try to work as much as possible on what the real customer needs are. So you basically build a car only when somebody has decided to buy that car. So what does it mean in software? In software, people are not buying features at the end of the day, but kind of, because usually, why do we code? We code because some people in the organization have decided that it was worth investing in building a feature. And and so the idea of just in time is you work on one feature at a time and and you put all the efforts into releasing it, and you make sure that the organization kind of like that feature flows through the organization. Um, it's quite conceptual, but one big tool, because there are ideas, there are practices, and there are tools. The really key tool when we're talking about just in time is called the Kanban.
Mm, yeah.
And what is important is that the word Kanban has been used in our digital world for a while now, but not but to describe anything that has columns,
Yeah, indeed.
which
It's a to-do
which
list.
it's become basically a to-do list has become a Kanban. And that's missing like some of the key aspects of what Kanban means at Toyota.
Uh, Do you have time? Can you explain the key elements of Kanban in 1 or 2 minutes?
I can try. Again, there's like entire books about it. But yeah, so Kanban, the idea is so it's a tool that is used to kind of connect what you're working on to the needs of the customer or the organization. And so basically you have these cards that represent like the current order. And so what we do in digital is we present these cards with, little rectangles and columns, so Trello cards or, Azure board cards, etc. But one of the key ideas is really to visualize the bottlenecks in the organization. So there's three key things that you need to kind of make sure that your columns have, or they won't be helping you on finding the bottlenecks. So the first one is really the lead time. There's only one thing to do, it's that one. So it's, in a way, it's very simple. You just put the number of days on the card since the day that somebody decided to, invest in that card. So I don't know if you decide to
So
build
it's a counter.
it's
Every
it's a
every
counter
day it's a day is
plus one
added.
every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if add you've decided to add a one click payment feature to your e-commerce website. And and you have the number of days since leadership or the organization decided that was key and until today. The reason people don't do it is because the information is often very painful.
Yeah, yeah, indeed.
It's hard to believe that, it's been 233 days, but it's a reality. And the idea is if you see the number of days quite quickly, you will see this feature standing out that has been there for 232 days. And that's a problem. So you can identify, why, what happened? Can we dig into it? Can we understand? So that's it will like identify some bottlenecks.
Okay.
Then the second thing, which is very important, is really to identify inventory work. Inventory. So in a factory, you walk around the factory, you see big piles of stuff. You go to the team and you're like, why is there such a big pile of stuff here? And they say, yeah, because the other team doesn't need them yet. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. So you've not been working on something that was like a good priority at the moment because the rest of the organization doesn't care. In digital, you don't see that. It's hidden somewhere in a Google Drive folder or whatever, GitHub. So the idea is to make it visual. So basically, you make sure that your columns are always split in two. One column that says waiting for someone and a column that says being worked on. Again, it's a bit painful because you realize that all of your cards end up in the waiting column. But that's the reality,
Which proves the point that we earlier mentioned at Amazon that there's so much dependencies that in the end work doesn't get done anymore.
No, exactly. And I mean, you're trying to you're trying to visualize the complexity of the organization. And of course, the
Yeah.
complexity is high, so you start by visualizing a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Um,
And then one by one, by visualizing, you create awareness, you start thinking about solutions, and then one by one, you can hopefully improve the situation.
I mean, and we'll mention it later, but of course, there's a cultural requirement for that to work. And then the third thing, so we've mentioned lead time on the card, column that says waiting, and then the third one is actually these columns should correspond to resources. So typically in an organization, the columns should be teams. Because we're not really interested in the to-do list within the team. They can have to-do lists if they want, that's fine. But I mean, what we need at the organization level is to see which team has too much work and which team doesn't have enough work. And how they're dealing with the work inside the team,
Mm.
that's their scope of autonomy.
Mm.
And so when you see often in these like columns, you will see like to do, doing, done. No, what you need is like, design team, dev team, translation team, you know, teams that are really working independently from each other, but actually depend on each other.
Hmm.
Mm.
Wow, I now that you've explained it, I don't think I've ever seen Kanban applied correctly like you now explain us to do. So thank you for the clarification,
You're
Fabrice.
welcome.
Let's move on to the last principle. In Agile, it states responding to change over following a plan. I suppose that comes from the fact that if you're near a deadline and there is some very valuable change that you can make, you should be able to make that change because it creates more value rather than to having to stick to the plan because that was the original plan. But you improve that principle by stating building a learning organization.
Mhm. It's not just about it's not improving, it's really like scaling it. Because the idea that is very good in Agile is, well, the team on the ground knows best what the market, how the market is changing and how they need to react to it. The question is, when you're a large organization, do you want a team on the ground to be able to influence the whole organization, instantly? When the best example of that we have is crowd effects. When a part of a crowd is starting to panic, so the whole crowd starts to panic, and we know that crowd effects usually have catastrophic consequences. So the question is, how do you make sure that the organization is aware of the changes? And how do you then make sure that the organization reacts, but reacts wisely, basically? So how do you respond to change wisely? And this is where you realize large organization, they have constraints that small teams don't have, but they can really compensate by actually, trying to be much more um, think thoughtful. Yeah, that's the word. To be, so what you need to do is as a large organization is to be much more thoughtful about it, because you can't change all the time, but but you definitely need to adapt. So building a learning organization was really a good way to capture what, when you look at Amazon or when you look at Toyota, how they manage to continue innovating at very large scale. And so the first idea is staying very, very connected to the customer's needs to really understand how the market is changing. Because it's once you become this huge boat, it's very hard to realize that you should be turning left. And the temptation is, of course, to continue straight. And for that, what we've realized is the common thing of learning organizations is how okay they are with looking at problems. And because to come back to my story about Kanban, if you put a Kanban, it's a tool that shows a lot of problems. If your organization is uncomfortable with problems, it's
Mm.
step one. There's no need to even try the Kanban. So step one is really this. Step one is making sure that the organization is comfortable with looking at problems.
Mhm.
So this is a huge culture shift. It has to come from the leadership team, and it has to be, repeated continuously. But yes, because one key symptom you see in organizations that are comfortable with problems is that the leaders ask about problems all the time, and they really don't blame people who talk about problems.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
It might be,
step.
I think in my book, I write that I don't know what the key ingredient of a successful organization is, but if I would have to name one, it is that everyone in the company is aware of all the problems that are in the company and nevertheless choose to continue to strive to do better.
Mm,
Something like that. So,
no,
because in
I
many
agree.
companies, the problem freezes people. When a problem arises, people freeze. And what you're explaining, the situation that you're explaining, is that problems activate people.
Problems are, they by default they're bad news, and in most organizations they are actually, risks because then if the organization is used to blaming someone and firing someone when there's a problem, then discovering the problem makes puts you in the puts you in the visor. So somebody is
Indeed.
going to be shot at, and it could be you because you discovered the problem.
Yeah.
So yes, you need to, but in an organization where it's really clear that problems will not lead to punishment. On the contrary, leadership shows how interested and curious they are about problems and how valuable they find them. And for that, what is really important and difficult, but is to remember, because when you see a problem, is to remember it existed before you saw it. So seeing it is not the bad news. The bad news is what made the problem happen. Seeing it is the good news. Now you can finally react and improve on it. So there's this mind,
Yeah.
there's this mind shift that needs to be done at as you say, for everyone in the organization.
Mm.
Once you have that, well, it's super powerful because this means that all of a sudden every issue that your customer have bubble up or bubbles across the organization. And these issues are such learning opportunities of where the market is going.
Mm.
And so that means, so that's really step one, is you keep at scale understanding that the market is moving
Mm.
and you have signals of where it's moving to.
Okay.
And then step two is how do you react wisely? And then the idea is it's difficult, but it's making sure that the organization builds on past learnings. We've already seen that something similar. We already reacted in a certain way. So maybe this time we need to react a bit better, etc. So that's really like the continuous improvement mindset and culture. And that relies, I would say, on a few things, but one is really documenting knowledge. And so one idea that we have in lean thinking is we call them standards because we want to kind of counter the temptation to document processes, because often people document the process, but with the objective of making sure that then people follow the process. What you want is to document the best way to do something today, but with a clear moral contract that it can be improved if you find a better way or if you face a problem that's not been taken into account by the standard. So the standard is more like a documentation of the knowledge and a training guide. Um, doesn't mean that, it does mean that you need to read it, but you can't really, like there's this expectation that if you're working on something that has a standard, you should be aware of the standard, you should know the standard, but there's not this expectation that you should follow it stupidly. That's the difference. And then one thing that is very important is Kaizen. So time dedicated to going deep into your work. And it's often a time when you realize that the standards are, not up to date anymore. So it's a moment for updating the standards.
Mhm.
You find, there's a new innovation. Oh wow, that should be included in the standard, or you know, the way systems have become more complicated, so this part of the standard doesn't work anymore, etc.
There's often tension between the dedication to customer value
Mm.
and the dedication to Kaizen time.
Mm. Well, it's
If you're in a custom, I mean, in really customer-driven organizations, somehow there's always a customer that needs something now that deprioritizes the time that was scheduled to do reflection and internal optimizations of the standards. Don't you
yeah,
agree?
it's no, I completely agree, and we're completely guilty of that. Um, because we our agile roots mean that the teams work in direct contact with the customer, and so they see the customer needs and the customer stress on a daily basis. So how do you insert Kaizen into that? Yes, it's actually very challenging. It's a really good point. Um, and I think I mean, the lean thinking would not be good if it didn't like account for these tensions. Because the reason why people don't do it is because they're difficult, because you need to do two things at the same time. You need to deliver super high quality, but you need to deliver fast. You need to deliver value to the customer, but you need to like have time for job introspection,
Hmm.
and the idea is to do both in the right amount. um, and that I think capturing knowing that you need to do both is already step one, and step two, of course, is like trying to do the right amount
Yeah,
of
and
each.
probably if you visualize also those Kaizen initiatives on your Kanban board, you will quite quickly see that you're continuously deprioritizing them and that they're taking much longer than they should. And then that triggers the dialogue on how we can change the system to prevent that.
But also,
Um,
I mean, I think an important point I need to say is also when you start doing it well, you realize that it's not one or the other. You realize that if you do super high quality, you actually start delivering faster.
mm,
You realize that if you do amazing Kaizen, you actually start delivering faster value to the customer.
mhm.
So there is this
Yeah,
kind
that's a
of,
very good point. Yeah, that's
you
it.
need to have
Because
this
that's
long-term
a
vision.
trade-off we often make. Like, but if we do Kaizen, we're not supporting our customers. But what you're saying is no, you will notice that doing Kaizen improves the quality that you deliver to your customers. Yeah,
That's of course that requires long-term
yeah.
thinking. It requires a bit of patience. It requires investment. So and it doesn't always work. So
So
it's not that easy.
to wrap up, just some final questions, Fabrice. So obviously, your target audience is people working in tech, I suppose, for the book.
Hmm.
But for me, this was one of the most enlightening conversations about agile and lean that I ever had. And I've had many. It's not like this is my first conversation, so I'm already super grateful for your time. Thank you. Why should non-tech people read your book?
But first, thank you very much for saying that. And I think we have a perspective on lean thinking, which is something that is valuable for every organization in the world, which I think is a modern perspective, therefore valuable for indeed probably everyone. And the tech side, of course, we're taking examples from our industry, but software is eating the world. So every organization, every industry has now a very strong tech component within them. And if they want to scale and remain agile, they need to build these like technology enablers to distribute the organization. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think these are the two arguments. We bring a modern perspective on lean thinking, and we also bring the tech aspect that actually every organization in the world needs to look at.
I will add a third one. Mm, so s- the way you approach software is by acknowledging that it's a complex system. And how do you continue to improve a complex system by in a way that you don't lose the speed and agility? And actually, an organization is also a complex system. So what I found is that the challenges that developers have in creating valuable software are very similar to the challenges that leaders have in creating a valuable organizational system. And
Mm.
so, reading your book, although the examples are focused mainly on software, they can also be applied uh, to the organizational system. So that
Mm.
would be a third one that I'll add. Where can people buy the book?
So it's on most online retailers, Amazon, of course, for example, Bol in Belgium.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
also available.
yeah. Okay. Well, and where they can they find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably where the best place to find me. So my name is Fabrice Bernhard. Uh,
Mhm.
and
It sounds like a German last name,
my
Bernhard.
my father's Swiss.
Ah, your father's was there.
Mm.
Well, again, Fabrice, thank you so much. I can't wait to publish this conversation and send it to all my tech contacts and beyond here in Belgium. And I will strongly advise each and every one of them to listen to the conversation and to buy your book. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nick.
There you go.